All right, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to another webinar of the Student-Centered Learning Research Collaborative at JSS. We are delighted today to feature one of our lead-off studies, an investigatory team from the American Institutes for Research in our initial two-year cycle of studies that we sponsored with the support of our funders over the last 2 years. They'll be presenting to you today some of the major findings and implications of their study. The title you'll see there is on the screen. I'm just going to give a couple introductory remarks and then hand it off here. I just want to say that we at the Student-Centered Learning Research Collaborative, this is what we do. We sponsor research in order to translate practices or translate best practices and findings for policy, for research, and for practice in order to advance the field, to build the evidence base for student-centered learning, and to help catalyze and curate best practices so that people can scale implementation and hopefully move the needle on equity. The American Institutes for Research were fantastic partners in this regard over the last 2 years. And while we're really excited that this study has concluded and that we're able to report these findings, we're also really sad that we don't get to work with this team anymore. So this is a bit of a bittersweet opportunity for us here today. I want to thank our Senior Program Manager, Melanie Mulvey, for putting all these things together and setting this up today. And also want to thank, of course, all of the team at American Institutes for Research. I'll let them introduce themselves. We will also have on the call today one of our Students at the Center Distinguished Fellows who is embedded within this research team, and I believe that she will have some opportunities to weigh in on the meaning of some of the findings and how that works. There will be some interactive components. We'd ask that if you are online right now and tapped in, that you can make sure that you're muted. I believe that Melanie has everyone muted, but just in case yours got switched off, you have the power to switch your own mute on and off. That way it keeps the background noise. And then we'll be communicating using the chat function, which you can select by using either the button at the bottom of the screen or one of the menus at the top of the screen that will open up a little panel off to the right. Delighted that you could join us today. With that, I will introduce the team, Wendy, Chrissy, and Kim at the American Institutes for Research, and let them take it from here. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Eric. I'm Wendy Sir. I'm the project director on this study, Learning with Others. And I'd like to just take a moment and introduce the team members that are here today. We weren't able to have all of our team members present, but I would like to acknowledge and let them say a quick hello. So let's start with Christina Zeiser, who is our quantitative lead. Chrissy, do you want to say a quick hello?
Hi, everyone. I'm Chrissy Zeiser. As Wendy mentioned, I was the quantitative lead on this project. I'm excited to talk to you about the results today.
Great. Hi, Chrissy. Kim Kenzora.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you from the American Institutes for Research.
Thanks, Kim. And Kim Carter, do you have audio? Kim Carter was a distinguished fellow with the Student-Centered Learning Research Collaborative and was with us every step of the way. Kim, if you have audio, if you could say a quick hello, that would be great.
Hi, I think my audio is working, and I'm thrilled to be able to be part of the conversation. It's been a phenomenal learning experience. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kim. Before we get started sharing a little bit about our journey and the results from our study, I want to pause and acknowledge the Jobs for the Future Student-Centered Learning Research Collaborative. They are not only our funder, they were our partner, they were our cheerleader throughout this process, and we could not have done it without them and with the tremendous group that they brought together, including Kim Carter. So big shout out to Eric, Melanie, and on all of the members of the collaborative. So today we have just 1 hour, and it's always a challenge when you've been working on a study for several years to just encapsulate it into a short hour. But here's the plan for how we're going to spend our time. We're going to share a little bit about the impetus of the study and kind of engage you in some of the questions that prompted and sparked our direction with this, including our key findings. We have 27 findings which are available in our full report. Today we'll just be sharing some selected findings that we felt were sort of more compelling. We will then be opening it up for some Q&A that you'll be posing your questions in the chat, so feel free to do that at any point, and we'll be sort of curating those and hopefully sharing out some responses to your questions or even your reactions. And then we want to close with just engaging both Kim Carter, our distinguished fellow, as well as all of you to think about what are the implications of this study for your own practice, for the field, for those you work with. Where can we go from here? Because there's some interesting findings that we're very excited to bring to your attention. So can you all take a moment and just put in the chat what kind of role you serve within your professional field and also your affiliation. I know we have some State Department of Ed folks on the line. I can see from Minnesota and the others that I recognize, but I would love to just see who's in the room. And Melanie, if you can help, for some reason I'm not able to see the chat. If you can give sort of some examples of what we're seeing as folks are putting their affiliations and roles in the chat.
It looks like we have Anna from Faith and History and Ourselves, and Kushala from JFF. We've got Janet from CAST Workforce Development. We have Carolyn, who's an administrator of a charter high school. Lori from Ed Redesign.
Great. Sounds like we have a wide variety of roles, which is fantastic. We feel that the results from our study will have implications across many different sectors of the education field. We want to start today with having you consider a question that sort of sparked our study. I want you to take a moment and think about a student in your life. This may be a student that you work with, it may be your own child, it may be a family member or a friend's child, who you feel traditional school has sort of not been able to serve these needs of this child well. And we would like you to think about, if you were to personalize learning for this student, what are the areas of personalization? And we've listed out 4 sort of key domains we think about when we think about personalized learning. Which of these are more important and less important? And Melanie has put on the side a little poll. So I encourage you to really consider which are more or less important. So not necessarily select all that apply for the first part, but try to split up your responses. And let's take a look at what we are thinking about in terms of how we meet the needs of a variety of different learners who don't do well in traditional settings. And Melanie, can we bring up the results of the poll?
We've got 2 people finishing up. 1, no. All right, last call, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
All right, bringing up the poll results.
So we're seeing an interesting split on the most important between academic and social emotional. And for the less important, no answer, which is, that's an interesting trend, but topical as being a less important area for personalization. The reason we asked you to reflect on this is that when we started this study a number of years ago, we were seeing a trend in the field that personalization was being equated with individual learning, often with the use of devices. And at the same time, Chrissy Zeisser and Meta Uberman, who was one of our original team members, were looking at some data from their study of deeper learning, and we're noticing that some of the models from these deeper learning schools were focused more on the individual, meeting each student where they are with personalized learning plans, advising, but not necessarily giving students regular opportunities for collaboration. They had another group of sites that really saw personalization in a more expanded way, that collaboration was really very much a part of how you can meet students' individual or personalized learning needs. And they were seeing some interesting differences in the patterns of outcomes, depending on whether these models were focused really on individual learning versus more peer and group learning. And so we put together this domain or this framework to think about all the different ways that we can meet students' needs And often the social emotional area is the area that is sort of overlooked when we think about personalized learning. I just came back from INACOL, which is a really big personalized learning conference. And again, the topic of students learning with others was really not something that's highlighted. We also started to wonder about whether or not, if the field is moving towards a model personalized learning that's really about individuals working on their own at their own pace, are we shortchanging students who are already being shortchanged in traditional one-size-fits-all teachers in front of the classroom? And so we took a look at the research, and indeed we found that there was evidence to suggest that students who have been traditionally underserved might actually stand to benefit more from opportunities to learn with others than middle-class white students. And this really raised our interest in saying, okay, is personalized learning really about individuals, or to meet each student's personalized needs, do we also need to consider the extent to which they can engage in social exchange with their peers? So that was the birth of our study. And what we have done, and Chrissy, I can't seem to give you control. Melanie, I'm hoping you can give Chrissy control of the slides. Chrissy is going to walk us through the design of the study and some of the questions we asked, and then our quantitative results, the results that were based on our surveys.
Okay. Thanks, Wendy. So at the beginning of our study, as Wendy already talked about, we reviewed the literature to really think through this area of why would opportunities for high quality collaboration have a positive influence on student outcomes. And what we saw in the literature was that it was largely based on students' perceptions of their classroom experiences. There is a level of peer support that you can get when you're working with your friends in your classroom to support your learning. There's also could lead to perceived higher expectations for learning from their teachers, as well as Wendy mentioned, increased feelings of personalization, that their personal learning needs are being met through these collaborative experiences. And so this theory of action that we have in this slide here really demonstrates how these different factors, the high quality collaborative experiences, positively influence classroom experiences, which then would positively influence outcomes, both dispositional and mindset outcomes like engagement, intrinsic motivation, and self-efficacy, but also leading to more positive academic outcomes. If students are more engaged, they're more likely to come to school, and we could see higher levels of achievement. The literature also supported the theory that perhaps the relationships between these different factors would not be the same across different racial ethnic groups, and in fact that it might be more positive for students from traditionally disadvantaged backgrounds. And so it was drawing from this literature that we created the research questions for our study. The first one, our first research question, really addressing those relationships I just illustrated. What are the relationships between opportunities for collaboration, classroom experiences, and outcomes, particularly for students who identify as Black? But to have those positive influences on outcomes, we also had to examine to the extent to which students are experiencing high-quality collaboration. Of course, first defining what do we mean by high-quality collaboration. And then finally, for our third research question, we wanted to ask teachers what contextual school-level factors they identify as helping or hindering their ability to provide these opportunities to students. We really wanted to delve deeply into a handful of schools to get details about students' experiences in the classroom. And so we collected 6 different data sources. We administered both teacher and student surveys. We conducted student focus groups. We interviewed math and ELA teachers as well as visited their classrooms to observe collaboration in action. And we were also able to obtain student attendance and grades from administrative records from participating schools and districts. We classify our study as descriptive and correlational. You will at no point hear me say that high quality collaboration causes student outcomes to be more positive. We really, because of our sample and because data were collected at one point in time, we really are talking about correlations, relationships. And as you can see from the data sources that we collected, we have a combination of both qualitative and quantitative measures, which we think is important because some things just can't be quantified. I think, as Wendy will present later, a lot of our interesting findings came from focus groups really getting into the qualitative aspects of students' experiences. Our study was conducted within 4 student-centered learning high schools. These were high schools that were diverse. We did require that at least 25% of the students in the school were Black in order to get the racially diverse sample that we wanted to address our research questions. As you can see, they were distributed across the U.S. In total, we collected data from 138 core subject teachers and 892 students in grades 9 through 12. And this pie chart just demonstrates that we were able to achieve a racially diverse sample of students for our student survey. Approximately half of the students identifying as Black in the survey, about a quarter identifying as white, and then also pretty large percentages identifying as Hispanic or other, where other actually included quite a large percentage of multiracial students as well as Asian students. In order to define what do we mean by high quality collaboration, we again turned to the literature, and we found that we really wanted to measure both structural features of collaboration and dynamic features. By structural features, we mean those things that can be planned in advance by the teacher. So what is the topic of the collaborative assignment? Are there clear group norms? Is the assignment itself student-centered, authentic, and culturally relevant? And also in planning the groups themselves, are they balanced? Is it just students picking their friends to work with, or is it making sure that there is a mix of students from different backgrounds who can learn from each other? For the dynamic features, we were focused on those interactions between both between the peers in the collaborative group and also between the students and their teachers in real time during the collaborative activity. So are they having responsive, respectful, and inclusive interactions? Are they engaging in constructive exchange? And is there shared leadership within the group? Or is there, on the other hand, what we often experience, is there a freeloader problem where some people take advantage of the collaborative group? And so these are the different features of collaboration that we really thought about when we wanted to measure high quality collaboration. I just briefly wanted to mention the measures of a classroom environment and the outcomes that we looked at. We wanted to look at student social emotional support, so both the positive peer support within their classroom as well as some of the negative aspects of being a high school student. So any of perceived microaggressions or social comparison concerns that students reported in the survey. We also looked at students' perceptions of their teachers' expectations for learning as well as how their peers supported their learning. And then in terms of personalization, both teacher support and just straight questions asking, do you feel like your learning needs are being met? For the mindset and dispositional outcomes, we relied on previously validated measures that have been used in the past of engagement, intrinsic motivation, and self-efficacy, particularly for engagement, looking at both emotional and behavioral engagement. And then for self-efficacy, looking both at academic self-efficacy and because collaboration has a lot to do with those peer-to-peer interactions, also seeing if there was an influence of high-quality collaboration on student social self-efficacy. Okay, so what did we find? So our first research question was, what are the relationships between collaboration, classroom experiences, and outcomes? And I'm first going to present results for all the students who responded to our student survey, and then I'll get to the second half of the research question, which focuses particularly on students who identify as Black. So among all students, we did find that high-quality collaboration was strongly and positively linked to perceptions of the classroom environment, as well as to those mindset and dispositional outcomes. We further wanted to disentangle these patterns of relationships to see, well, do the perceptions of the classroom environment explain the positive relationships between high-quality collaboration and student outcomes? And I think ultimately our answer is not entirely. We did see that the positive relationship for between high-quality collaboration and student outcomes persisted even after we accounted for perceptions of the classroom environment. However, we did notice that some of the classroom environment measures did a better job than others of starting to explain this positive relationship. So in particular, we saw that measures of personalization or students reporting that their learning needs are being met did a better job of explaining that positive relationship between high quality collaboration and the mindset and dispositional outcomes than the other classroom experience measures. So in our study, we did find that the positive relationship between high-quality collaboration and personalization started to explain why we might see high-quality collaboration being positively related to student engagement, task valuing, intrinsic motivation, and self-efficacy. We did, as I mentioned before, we did also collect information about attendance and grades. We did not see a positive relationship between high-quality collaboration and attendance, but we did find a weak and positive relationship between high-quality collaboration and grades. And this was even after we accounted for students' grades in the prior academic year. As you can imagine, because high-quality collaboration is positively related to engagement and self-efficacy, once we accounted for those, the positive relationship with the mindset and dispositional outcomes, that weak relationship with grades disappeared. And so this does kind of follow our original theory of action that because high-quality collaboration is positively related to these mindset and dispositional outcomes, it could also be positively related to student achievement. And now we wanted to present also focusing on Black students. So for this traditionally underserved students, do we see the same pattern of relationships? And the answer in some, yes, we did find it's the same pattern of relationships that we saw for the total sample of students in our study. So we did find that high quality collaboration was strongly and positively associated with both perceptions of the classroom environment and those mindset and dispositional outcomes. And again, personalization did the best job of starting to explain that positive relationship among all of the perceptions of the classroom environment. Personalization stood out as the feature that started to explain the positive relationship between high quality collaboration and those mindset and dispositional outcomes. In our final report, which is now available on the Hub, we also talk about some of the relationships that we compared between Black students and white students who responded to the survey. And we didn't find a lot of differences between groups, but there were a couple of different patterns of relationships that were different between groups. So I do want to refer you to the final report to see all of those results. But here we're just going to point out one particular difference that we observed, and that was the relationship between high-quality collaboration and grades. And so similar to what we observed for the total sample, high-quality collaboration was positively associated with grades regardless of prior academic performance. Again, it was a pretty weak relationship, but it was a positive, significant relationship with grades for Black students. However, when we looked at our sample of white students, we did not see that positive relationship. And this has led us to think that really following what we've read in the literature, opportunities for high-quality collaboration might be particularly beneficial for traditionally underserved students and might actually help to reduce achievement gaps if the positive effects of high-quality collaboration are felt more among minority students. Okay, I just want to take a pause there. I've been talking for a long time now, and give everybody an opportunity to reflect, have any questions about the study design or any of the findings I've presented so far.
Thank you, Chrissy. I want to point out that the way in which we measured personalization, in particular, there was one set of items, and I put that in the chat box so that everyone could see that. Students were asked to think about the extent to which their learning needs were being met, and it was measured by, I get to learn in the ways that work best for me. I get to do work that is at the right level of challenge, not too easy and not too difficult. I get to do work that I'm interested in and that matters to me, and I feel as if my individual learning needs are met. And so what Chrissy was presenting in one of the slides that showed the connection between high-quality collaboration and outcomes was this idea that when students have experiences of high-quality collaboration, they're very likely to also feel like their individual learning needs are met. And when those two things are true, then we saw those positive outcomes, the mindsets and dispositions, and in the part of Black students, also some differences in terms of higher grades. So I just wanted to point out the specifics. Sometimes we throw this term personalized learning around, and this was the particular set of items that really stood out in our findings. Is there anything you want to add on that, Chrissy?
No, thanks for pointing that out, Wendy. I do think it's important because most of our study relies on these survey measures. To be more specific about what exactly students are saying in the survey is really helpful to interpret the findings.
And I think, one of the other things that was gratifying for me was we had this initial theory that kids will feel like their experiences are more personalized if they have the chance to interact and have exchange and opportunity for collaboration with their peers. And we certainly found evidence from these survey findings to suggest that, yes, kids feel like their experiences in the classroom are more personalized when they are also having these experiences of high-quality collaboration. Now, while we did not find a lot of differences between Black and white students, we did find some subtle differences in terms of those patterns of relationships. For instance, you'll see in the report that white students were more likely to have a connection between high-quality collaboration and teacher expectations and outcomes than Black students. And there were other sort of subtle differences that we started to see. So one aspect of our study that oops, Melanie, can you give me control back? One of the ways that we decided to collect data to sort of get a more qualitative view of students' experiences was through student focus groups. And the way we designed this was at our 4 study sites, we organized 2 different kinds of focus groups. One was with a cross-section of students from that site, so a mix of white, Hispanic, Black, Asian, whatever racial ethnic groups were present. And then another group that was just students who had self-identified as Black, and we used students' survey ratings to group those students. So we had 8 focus groups in total, 2 at each site, and both of the groups were led by a research team member who was also Black. So when we had the all-Black focus groups, that was also led by a Black facilitator. And the findings I'm about to present from these focus groups are very rich. We cannot generalize from these findings, but they certainly give us a lot of interesting emerging findings. And we were able to quantify to a certain extent because we were able to look at the numbers of remarks by students in these 2 different kinds of groups. So a lot of the differences, when we say we found differences, it was not only qualitative thematic trends, but also we're able to quantify on a certain level these differences. So I want to share a few of the interesting findings that we saw in our focus groups. So we
Wendy, I do have a couple of questions from folks if you want to pause for a second for me to funnel those to you, if that works.
Great. Yeah, that sounds great.
So, cool. So one is how frequent were observations of high quality collaboration versus potentially lower quality collaboration?
Okay. So I think we'll actually address that in research question 2 a little bit more, but I can give you a spoiler alert, lots of variability within schools.
Great. And can you further define collaboration and give a few examples of what you considered high quality collaboration?
So let me go back to the slide that Chrissy presented in the beginning. Oops,
yeah, I think there were some details there, yeah.
We did a research review to try to, more specifically measure what we meant by high quality collaboration. And we organized this into 2 different areas, structural features and dynamic features. The structural features are those aspects of high quality collaboration that are planned in advance by the educator. So the extent to which the collaborative activity is well organized, there are established norms for the group on how they're supposed to interact, that the educator has taken care to balance the group in terms of gender, race, ability, those students who tend to have more facilities socially versus less. So we were looking for a mix of students. We want, and I know this sounds silly, but we wanted the test to actually require collaboration. Sometimes people call it collaborative learning, but actually there's no collective goal and there's no expectation of interdependence. So we were defining high quality collaboration as requiring that interdependence between students. And then this last area, the topic or the focus of that activity should be something that student-centered and authentic, so it really speaks to the students who are engaged in that task. So those are the things that the educator could plan in advance. We also consider high quality collaboration to be what happens in real time when students are in these collaborative groups. So are they responsive and respectful with each other? Are they including all students in the conversation and in the work? Are they engaging in constructive exchange where they're giving one another feedback, being critical friends? And is there shared, responsibility for the tasks and shared leadership. Some of the research we did talked about things called social loafing, where there's this phenomena in collaborative groups where some students say, well, everyone's taking care of this, so I'm just going to kind of sit back and let everyone else do the work. So this last point is really to speak to the extent to which all students were expected to play some kind of role and assume some kind of responsibility. So I'm hoping that person who posed that question can put in the chat whether or not I'm answering your question sufficiently. But Chrissy, do you want to just talk about what we found in terms of the interrelationship between these various subcomponents of high-quality collaboration? Because I think that's important to point out.
Sure. Yeah, and I just wanted to point out, Wendy did a good job summarizing all these different aspects of high-quality collaboration. We do provide a construct map on the Hub because we do measure this so much through the student survey. Again, you can go refer to the construct map on the Hub to look at the individual questions that we ask students to try to measure all of these different aspects of high-quality collaboration. And just on a methodological note, we did do like exploratory factor analysis and confirmatory factor analysis to make sure that all these things really hung together. And in fact, we tried to look at like structural and dynamic features separately, but they're just so highly correlated that it really does seem to be measuring one concept of collaboration.
Thanks, Chrissy. So actually, it's good that we did a quick revisit to this list, because some of the things I'm just about to present from the student focus groups will refer back to some of these aspects of students' experiences with collaboration in the classroom. So now we're going to move forward quickly, speeding through. So as I said, we did conduct focus groups with a mix of races and with all Black students, and we were able to look at the themes that emerged, both overall, but some of the most interesting themes was the differences that we found. And there were 3 areas in which we found some distinct differences between students' reports of their collaborative and classroom experiences in the all Black focus groups and in the mixed race focus groups. So the 3 areas where we found the most differences were in the perceived relevance of the collaborative activities, their experiences of exclusion or discomfort and racial stereotyping, and perceptions of teacher support. So I want to share some student quotes, because I think that, these are really very, very rich. We collected through the focus group transcripts what kids were saying, and our facilitator, this was a semi-structured format with students. We had roughly between 6 and 8 students in each one of the groups. So students' perceptions of the personal relevance of collaborative activities, we saw a tremendously distinct difference between the all Black and the mixed race focus groups. So for instance, in the all Black focus groups, 20 students talked about the extent to which collaborative activities just didn't resonate with them in their lives, and only 4 remarks in the mixed race focus group. So, a huge disparity in terms of the extent to which students felt like the collaborative activities were reflective of their lived experience. And this is one of the quotes that we collected. One of the interesting things about this student who's saying that he can't talk about Black Lives Matter in school is that he felt like teachers were discouraging them from talking about sort of more current issues related to race. And this theme of sort of teachers discouraging them to really talk about their lived experience was prevalent across multiple all Black focus groups. A second area where we saw a distinct difference between the kinds of remarks we were seeing in the all Black and the mixed race focus groups related to collaborative experiences was experiences of exclusion and stereotyping and marginalization. And it really kind of falls into 2 different categories. One that was this explicit, which is captured in this first quote, that feeling like they're treated like all Black students are based off the hood and things you see in movies, et cetera. But almost more disturbing was the insidious kind of marginalization that a lot of students talked about. This student at the bottom says, if someone asks a question out loud and say me and somebody else is trying to answer and the other student is white, everyone's going to turn and pay attention to the white student. And this was, this was even a more upsetting quote for us as a research team to sort of see the extent to which these Black students were sharing this in their focus group. The third area, which was true for all students, not just for Black students, but we did see a slight difference between Black and mixed race focus groups, was this idea of not having sufficient teacher support during collaborative group work. And this was actually really surprising to us. We didn't expect to see this. It's almost like the students were feeling like they were abandoned. And this was more prevalent from the all Black than the mixed race focus groups. Basically, like, we're out there on our own. You know, so this, the third quote here says, they tell you what to do, they stand there, they sit back down, and then tell you to get to work, and we're just basically on our own. And when we talk to teachers in interviews and surveys, this is certainly not the perception of teachers, this is one of those areas where the students and teachers did not agree. Teachers felt like they were being great facilitators and promoting autonomy, and the kids felt like we just don't have enough support and guidance, and we're just like out there on our own. We have no idea what we're doing. So this was one of those very, very interesting results. So I encourage you to put some questions in the chat for us regarding to the focus groups, but I want to move on because we have limited time to talk about some of our other research questions and what we found in terms of the prevalence of high-quality collaboration and also teacher perspectives. So our second research question, as Chrissy mentioned, was the extent to which students had opportunities to participate in high-quality collaborative learning experiences in the 4 schools that we were studying. And we were collecting information about this from a variety of different sources, but in particular from student survey reports and also from classroom observations. So we went into classrooms, and the observation instrument we used is available on the hub, and we were able to observe the extent to which students were experiencing those structural and dynamic elements of high-quality collaboration. So as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we found a lot of variability. We found a lot of variability in how often, those were based on survey findings, how often students were having the chance to engage in high-quality collaboration. We are finding variability in how long those collaborative activities were lasting. And then we found lots of variability in the extent to which there was high quality. And one of the things we had not set out to look for was subject area differences. But oh my gosh, it just kept showing up, this math versus ELA. So if you look at this graph, you can see that ELA is represented by the bright light blue and math by the dark blue. And the little asterisks that show up suggests or indicates a statistically significant difference. And we were finding this in a number of different areas, which you're going to see in just a moment, where, for instance, this is asking, this is questions about whether or not the dynamics of these collaborative groups were high quality. And according to teachers, and again, this was reflected in students as well as in our observation measures, we have ELA as being a higher quality than math. And we saw across classrooms just a huge amount of variability. Variability within schools, so much variability within schools that there was really, we were not able to capture variability across schools. This was perhaps one of the most strongly supported findings of the entire study. We found this in every single data source except for teacher interviews, that teachers and students and observations all suggested that the prevalence of student-centered, culturally responsive activities during collaboration were low. But this was particularly true in mathematics classrooms. Again, lower in math, higher in ELA, but low overall. We heard this in the student focus groups. We saw this in the student surveys. We saw this in the teacher surveys. We saw this in the classroom observations. Kids were being engaged in collaborative activities, but these were not necessarily collaborative activities that really spoke to the students or were appropriate to their interests and lived experiences. Another interesting finding related to the quality of what we saw was that constructive exchange, so the extent to which students are giving one another feedback, building on each other's ideas, this was low overall, but this was the reassuring result was, even though it was low overall, at least it was higher during activities that were collaborative group time. So in other words, kids were engaging in more constructive exchange during a collaborative group activity than they were during regular classroom time. So that was a little reassuring, but really discouraging that overall the level of constructive exchange that we saw. And again, these were 4 sites that were student-centered schools that emphasized collaboration, and constructive exchange was just one of those aspects of collaboration that was just low overall. This is our whirlwind trip through our study. Research question 3 was really about teacher perspectives, the extent to which teachers recognized benefits, challenges, and whether or not they felt like their school context provided support through either the structures or the leadership. So overall, teachers did report lots of benefits associated with high quality collaboration for students. However, again, we saw some subject area differences where English teachers were more likely to report benefits than math teachers. It was not a huge difference, but as you can see, we have two areas that were statistically significantly different between math and ELA teachers. All right, and then perceived challenges. This is a very interesting finding. The students, as Chrissy was talking about a few minutes ago, really saw a close connection between I have a high quality collaborative experience and I feel like my classroom is more personalized to me. From the perspective of teachers, they were really talking about the kinds of challenges for collaboration as being those things that we might assume are strategies to personalize. So for instance, teachers felt like it was a challenge to be able to offer collaborative learning when they had students who had lots of different needs. They saw challenges with, a mix of student abilities in the classroom as being a reason why they couldn't collaborate. They also shared some of these challenges during the interviews. And really our big takeaway was that for many teachers, collaboration is almost like mutually exclusive from personalization, that these two things kind of can't go together. Whereas in the minds of students, that was the complete opposite. Students who felt like they had high quality collaborative experiences felt like their learning was more personalized. One of the areas where we saw a subject area difference, which probably is not surprising, was that math teachers were more likely to say that the reason they couldn't offer collaborative learning activities was that they had too much content to cover in the classroom. And during our data forums where we were able to bring some preliminary results to our study sites, math teachers were not at all surprised about this and really spent some time with this finding talking about this. And then beliefs about teachers, from teachers about the extent to which their school leaders support them. Again, we saw differences by subject area. English teachers really felt like they were better supported to offer collaboration and personalization than math teachers. So again, this pattern that math teachers are seeing fewer benefits, more challenges, and feeling less support for collaboration than ELA teachers, which was very interesting. So this was a lot to sort of share with you in a very, very compressed amount of time. This is reiterating some of the things that Chrissy talked about when we talked about the study design. That as interesting as these findings are, it's important for us to point out that this was based on 4 sites, 800 students, 138 teachers. So it's not a huge sample. We didn't have an experimental design, so really our analysis was about the association or the strength of relationships and patterns of relationships. And Chrissy can talk more about this, but we also found some really interesting results with differences in how students interpreted survey items, particularly those that talked about things like microaggression. And then as our school sites pointed out during our data forums, another limitation was that we did not collect data about the race or ethnicity of the teachers, so we weren't able to look at the extent to which there was a match between students' race and teacher race within classrooms when they were talking about their experiences. So I'd love, Eric and Melanie, if you're seeing any questions, that we can take a few minutes, and Chrissy and Kim and I can respond to any questions that you're seeing in the chat.
I'm not seeing any currently, but I want to invite people to please post questions in the chat function, and we'll curate those and send them to the AIR team live here. So please ask any questions you might want to pose.
This is a lot to throw at people. So while we're waiting for some of the questions to come in, what I'd love to do is turn it over to our distinguished fellow. Kim Carter, as I mentioned, was a partner in this work from beginning to end. She was helping us with the development of measures and survey instruments, and then she helped us with data forums where we went out and presented the preliminary results of the study to sites and really engaged them in a full day of kind of digging through the findings. And I'd love for Kim to think about some of these key findings that are displayed on the slide and what her big takeaways were from the study and any of these findings. And I invite any of you to look at these findings and kind of think about which of these resonated for you in particular as we were presenting our results. So Kim, do you have audio?
I do. Thank you, Wendy. This was such a fascinating study. It was such a great opportunity to be part of, and it raised more questions than anything else for me. So even these findings lead me to have further questions about why. Because we can have hunches, but that doesn't give us answers. Our hunches may need to be tested. So in your recap slide, number 4, that Black students experience lower relevance, greater exclusion, and lower perceived support from teachers, I think is a really significant finding for us to dig into more, to learn more about. And I say that particularly because across the 4 schools, there really was a wide distribution of participation. So, and I don't think that we would say, if you went back to the slide of the percentage of students and how they were across the different categories, Black students were not a minority in the overall study, yet they still experienced that feeling. And I think there's some really important things for us to look into more deeply so that we can make adjustments for that, make improvements. I was really impressed by the strong linkage, I want to use the right words, between collaboration and personalization. I think Chrissy would agree, as long as I stick with correlation and I stay away from causation, I'm okay here. But the connection and the interpretation of the relationships between personalization, or maybe it's not interpretation, perceptions of personalization in relation to collaboration, I think were really important. And then one more of the many is the distinctions between teachers' perceptions and students' perceptions. I think that's another important piece to dig into more. So those are my top of my head. There were also some pieces that I think were really intriguing about the relationships around how what amount of the relationship between high quality collaboration and outcomes were explained by that sense of having one's needs met. I think that was a really significant piece that emerged as well.
Thanks,
Got
Kim.
some questions coming in here, Wendy.
Oh, good. Okay. What do we have?
Yeah. So this one's from Anna. It sounds like personalization was the mediating variable between high quality collaboration and student outcomes. So that you should probably comment on whether that is the right way to phrase the outcomes here or phrase the findings here. Is that your key take home, and especially for Black students, is that a takeaway we can use from this research? Or is it understood more equally for all students? And she goes on to say that this reminds her of Uri Treisman's work with college freshmen and calculus many years ago, and those who worked in collaborative groups got better grades, they stayed engaged and tended to be more successful. So there's lots of connections with previous research here, but the question remains, was the mediating variable between high quality collaboration and student outcomes of mindsets and dispositions, is that the key take home, especially for Black students, or is it more equally for all students?
I will say a couple things, but really this one's for Chrissy. Yes, it was a mediating variable, but Chrissy, clarify me if I'm wrong, but this was not particularly stronger for Black than for white. The only difference being that we saw that difference in the academic outcomes for Black students. Chrissy, can you weigh in on this one?
Right, yeah, I would say that. I would say we observed it for the total sample. It wasn't really a racial ethnic difference, but it was just as strong for the Black students in our sample.
Other
Great.
questions?
Yeah, another question would be, and this is really, thinking from a research collaborative standpoint and how to build a field. I suspect that there are researchers who are listening to this now live or who may access it later So as researchers, to what extent, if you could redesign this study again, what would you tweak? What would you follow up more deeply? What would you do differently?
That's an excellent, excellent question.
That comes from Rebecca Wolf, who you know well.
I think, well, I mean, as I pointed out in the study limitations, I think knowing and collecting more information on the race of the teachers would have been an essential question that we should have answered and collected data on. So for instance, we had this finding that for white students, teacher expectations was a stronger mediating variable for white students than it was for black students. But it is our perception, we don't have any hard data, but it is our perception that most of the staff in these schools were white, and yet we had a 45% black. So that means the likelihood that there was a racial mismatch was very high. So I think had we known that, it would have been interesting to look at the extent to which perhaps teacher expectations was important for black students when there was a racial match, for instance. I think that would be an important question. Kim and Chrissy, any thoughts on other things you would do differently next time around?
I would just add, as much as I'm so interested in that racial match between teachers and students, I was also very cautious about that given our small sample of schools and the fact that our schools were small. Very sensitive topic there when you can't really make it confidential anymore. But another topic that if I could go back and do differently, which Wendy briefly touched on, was these survey measures and how measures of, say, microaggressions didn't work as well for different groups of students. And so I think that could be a study all in itself, is how can we design surveys to better capture student experiences, knowing that students have different lived experiences and the way that they interpret survey questions will differ based on their experiences.
Mm-hmm. And this is Kim.
Yeah, that was. Sorry, I'll sorry.
Oh, go ahead, other Kim.
Other Kim. Yeah, other Kim. I was just going to agree. The microaggressions differences in those questions was the first thing that came to mind for me. And the second piece that I'm really curious about is some of the distinctions between results and surveys and information that came in focus groups.
Yeah, and in particular, information that came in focus groups that were facilitated by researchers of color versus not. So that seemed to be a key to unlock a lot of more candid responses, perhaps, among students, was having the person leading the group be a woman of color. But what I was going to add is not so much what I would do differently, but sort of what I would do next. And it really addresses this notion that this is a descriptive study, and it sure would be nice to get out there and develop an intervention for high-quality collaboration in classrooms and really look in a much more systematic way, in a causal way, about what happens when kids really get high-quality collaborative experiences as part of their instruction versus instruction as usual. I mean, it would be really powerful to be able to make those kinds of statements in a causal fashion. I think that, this is not, for a descriptive study, it was done in such a careful way that I feel like, it's not just sort of this throwaway thing that you just look at the methods and you toss it in the trash. I think that it's because of the structural equation modeling, because of the careful psychometrics, because of the diverse research team, I think we have a lot of really interesting stuff to dig into here. But I think that in terms of moving the field forward, you need more than this.
So to the extent that we can begin to identify specific high-quality collaborative structures, I would commend to everyone that you check out the High Tech High Graduate School of Education study in our last cycle, where they drilled in specifically in mathematics classrooms looking at agentic experiences and collaborative experiences that promote students claiming themselves as math learners and as agents and as owning math learning. And they identify a small set of specific collaborative strategies that that are showing, at least in their studies, to have some pretty sweet effects. So I know sweet is not a statistical term, but it's a cool term. Some good effects on the students that were part of that study. So there are some things out there where we can be a little bit, again, lots of caveats and characterizations about, you know, being careful about extrapolating beyond the study, but we can get closer to making some causal claims, particularly with those who were involved in the study that it wasn't an experimental design, but it was an improvement science design, and they're able to show some pretty cool outcomes from that. So there's good stuff out there. Another quick question, if we have time to answer it. Lots to unpack here, says Laura Gannon from an ed designer, one of fans and partners in our collaborative. How do we think about what teachers need to begin to address with these findings? How do we think about what teachers should do? Like if you wanted to talk to a teacher about what they might consider doing in their classroom as a result of this study, what are some top things you might say, knowing, of course, causal versus correlational caveats and the usual?
So do you want us to respond to that question, Eric?
Me?
No, do you want someone from the research team to respond to the question about what teachers can do?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So Lori, thanks for your question. In our report, we do have some suggested next steps for teachers. And Kim Carter, feel free to also weigh in terms of what we heard from the data forums. But for instance, just starting with, oh my gosh, there's actually a definition for high quality collaboration, how helpful. So we do encourage teachers to think about both those structural and dynamic features of high quality collaboration. And our survey measures and our observation measure are actually good starting points for people to think about what does that actually look like, not only from my end as a teacher in practice, but what does it feel like from the perspective of a student who's experiencing these collaborative opportunities. So that's one area for teachers. What we heard a lot from the data forums was a lot of surprise about the experiences of Black students. And again, as Chrissy, I think it was Chrissy pointed out, or no, Kim pointed out that the percentages of Black students in these sites was not a minority. And in most sites, it was half of the student population, and yet they were still experiencing what they felt was stereotyping, marginalization, exclusion. And a lot of the teachers were very surprised about this. These were student-centered schools. They really felt like they were understanding the experiences of their students. And so we encouraged teachers, and teachers were really sort of saying this is what they wanted to do, was to be more aware of how Black students might actually be experiencing the classroom and collaboration differently than their peers. And then the third area really was about this teacher support for collaboration. And I remember back one of the data forums, and Kim Carter was there, and one of the teachers stood up and said, oh my God, our students are feeling like they're being abandoned. We've got to just check, we've got to, you know, check in more closely with students and make sure they really feel supported during collaboration. Not that we're going to babysit them, but that they feel like they've got the tools and they're ready to be autonomous before we kind of just let them go. So those are three areas that come to mind, but I invite other members of our research team, particularly those who are at the data forums, to share any other thoughts on next steps for teachers.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something that came up. I attended one of the data forums, and in terms of how are we teaching students to group, if group was a verb, or collaborate is probably the actual verb that exists, how are we teaching them? Because some of the students are coming in with no experience in middle school or prior grades of right. Collaboration. And so, I mean, even as a college student working on projects, how was I taught to speak constructively with students that didn't agree with me? I think in this day and age, there could be explicit instruction on these aspects of collaboration, like constructive exchange, like how do you support other students, make other students feel comfortable sharing, because not all students, you know, maybe it's not social loafing, maybe students are just very uncomfortable speaking in group situations. How do you support students so that they are able to collaborate effectively?
It's a great addition.
The quick thing that I would say is that I'm really intrigued by how we help teachers check their perceptions. How do we encourage them to get regular feedback and be in regular communications with students so they're not assuming things, because there are not only cultural biases to that, but there are positional and experiential biases to that. It can be really hard to unpack what's become automatic for you, whether it's collaboration or what you do once you've been given directions. So I think there's a lot more to investigate in that area too.
Great.
Thank you.
Any concluding remarks from the AIR team before we wrap up?
The only concluding remark is actually, I just want to thank our sites. I mean, I think, you know, it's tremendous what our sites and what all sites who participate in research, but I mean, they opened their doors to us. We had teachers open their classrooms to us. We had students engaging in focus groups. We cannot thank the sites enough for their full participation in the study, including a full-day data forum where they dug into the findings and really helped us to see it from their perspective. So, Eric, I think that's my concluding remark. And feel free, other members, to share any final thoughts.
Chrissy or Kim?
I just put something in the chat. I think the commitment and engagement on the part of all participants during the data forums was incredibly impressive. These were educators who cared deeply, deeply about being effective for their learners. And it showed. It showed throughout the day. They had hard conversations. They had some emotional conversations sometimes, and they wanted to get better.
All right, terrific. Thank you so much to the team from American Institutes for Research. It's been a fantastic ride, and being able to work with you, think through the meaning you're making of those data, how you were engaging your participants, and now the implications for the field. If I could add one thing that I think is really important for the field to think about in terms of implications and next steps, it would be that this is evidence for us that we really need to be problematizing how we construct personalization in the field, and to make sure that when we're in conversations with leaders of systems, of states, nonprofits, and even funders, that when personalization becomes isolation, student with computer, student with teacher, student one-on-one with whatever or whoever it may be, that has implications. That is a good thing. There are really good things that can happen from those. But if that's done at the exclusion of really rich, high-quality collaborative opportunities, we may be missing out some of the richest learning opportunities that students can have to be able to learn with each other in diverse settings, with well-designed collaborative learning opportunities that teachers are able to set up for their students. So just want to underscore, personalization is not isolation, and we need to be thinking about how to play with that while we're paying attention to the importance of social comparison cues, status differences in the classroom, and the extent to which teachers are prepared to see and react positively and productively to those differences in the classroom, particularly as they are acted out in cooperative learning activities. Really crucial thing for teacher education to pay close attention to, and for those of us who are supporting teachers in schools and systems to think from a professional development standpoint. So further work to be done, lots of questions we should continue to be asking, lots of investigations we should continue delving into, and we in the Student-Centered Learning Research Collaborative are excited to take those leaps. So I want to thank the AIR team, want to thank the staff at JFF for supporting all this work, and our fantastic funders over the last 2 years. Stay in touch. We've got a whole slew of a whole new set of research studies whose interim findings and final findings will be coming out over the next period of months and years. So stay tuned for more cool stuff, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thanks.